Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Cullen McFader, joined as always by Clark Coffey for a new episode today.
Wait, not an old episode? Not an old
episode.
Okay,
not
we got a
rehash.
new episode. Yay!
Brand new, hot off the presses.
Fresh out the oven.
New episode.
Hot off the presses. All right.
Exactly.
And what is our film for the day?
Today, we are doing the 2003 film from Afghanistan, Osama, directed by Siddiq Barmak, and starring Marina Golbari. I hope I've pronounced those correctly.
I think that's as good as I could have done, at least, yeah?
MGM Home Entertainment brings you the Golden Globe winner for Best Foreign Film. The first movie made in Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban. To save her family, a girl must become a boy. Inspired by a true story, a critically acclaimed masterpiece seen through the eyes of a child. Osama, now available on VHS and DVD.
And this is my pick for a few different reasons, which we'll get into. But definitely the first Afghan film that we've done. And it's, I believe, both of our first times seeing this film too. So we can get into a little bit of that. I can take the reins on going first if you'd like, or you can take the reins and go first, or how do you feel?
How about, why don't you go first? Because you've picked it, and not just for that, because I think that your connection to this film and kind of why you picked it is a good kind of framing device, gives it some context, and I think it's just a really interesting story, like your personal experience with Afghanistan, which is kind of what led you to pick this. And so I think that'd be a really interesting thing for the audience to understand.
So I had never seen this film before, as I said, and I was actually, funny enough, I was just kind of scrolling through winners of different awards from the Cannes Film Festival, because a friend of mine had worked on a film that had gotten some certain award from Cannes, and so I was like, I wonder what other films have won this. And I saw this on that list. It said Osama, Afghanistan. I was like, interesting, because I had actually last year, from September to the end of November, I spent a few months living in Afghanistan and working there. And I sort of realized that I hadn't seen much, if any, of Afghan cinema. Of course, there's a very interesting history to why Afghan cinema may be a little bit hard to find, which we'll also get into. But I thought, it might be a neat way to also talk about a bit of the experiences that I had there. And found out a bit later that the people I was, my boss, essentially, when I was in Afghanistan, is actually good friends with the director of this film, which is even closer connection, which is quite fascinating and a bit exciting as well. And so I thought
small world.
I would choose this film, and we could talk a little bit about it. And one thing too, I know we always do kind of put the trailer in our episodes, and I just want to say right off the bat, if you are thinking of watching this film, the trailer does not do it justice. The trailer is very clearly edited by some trailer house somewhere, and it kind of makes it it's got this intense action movie music, and it's it makes it look very different, whereas the film is a much more grounded drama than the trailer would suggest. So that's my little PSA right off the start. But first time watching it, I actually found quite viscerally off the bat that I had a very strong emotional reaction to the start of the film, to the point where I almost felt like I needed to kind of pause it and catch my breath. Of course, my experience in Afghanistan was nothing like what is portrayed in this film, nor is it like people who are from there and have lived there and through a lot of
Sure.
these things. But
Right.
I think most of that reaction just came from working with a lot of people who had
Had those experiences.
lived
Yeah.
through all of these events and experiences and things like that, and seeing
Yeah.
the very real remnants of these things, some of which
Mm.
are also still going on. Of course, this film takes place during the first um, Taliban rule in Afghanistan in the 1990s,
Mm.
and now, of course, the Taliban is back in power in Afghanistan. So similarities in that regard. There's obviously, of course, differences in today and then, but it was just very, for lack of a better term, it felt like I was kind of suddenly flooded with all of these memories that I had experienced while I was there, and all
Mm.
these just different things that kind of are difficult to explain. But I think anybody
Mm.
who's been in you know uh, on a situation like that, whether it's like documentary filmmakers going to, see and witness tough situations, you kind of, those memories do kind of stick with you. So
Yeah.
it was very interesting to kind of have that reaction right off the bat. I found it was like a pretty strong reaction I felt. And then just going through the film, I mean, like on its kind of own merits, I found it really, really beautifully shot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought that the performances were all incredible, and of course, we're going to get into the like specifics of those performances being primarily amateur actors and things like that, which I thought was incredible. But I really kind of connected with the film in a lot of ways, again, just because of my experience being there,
Yeah.
and that was a big reason why I chose it. And it also is kind of also in a strange way, I shot a documentary while I was there, and it's sort of ignited my
Mm.
passion to get that film finished and to actually start kind of cutting that together. So positive in that sense as well. Like I think that it really,
Motivating, huh?
it motivated me. It tells a very stark, real story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, very, very stark.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was shocked to the level at which both the film moved me and how much I enjoyed the film, on a kind of just a
And aesthetic.
divorced from, yeah, an aesthetic level. I thought the film was really, really well done.
Yeah.
So I'll save it there so that we can talk about the specifics later.
Yeah. Yes, we go
But
through it.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, because I just think it's a pretty unique situation. Not many people have gotten to travel to Afghanistan and spend time there, and you're one of the few, at least certainly outside of like military personnel from the Western world or from North America. So I think that's extremely unique and interesting, and I hope to hear a little bit more about that as we kind of talk through the movie. But I mean, I and was not familiar with this film. I didn't have any like preconceived, I didn't bring anything to the table as far as like having any background on this film at all. You mentioned it. I didn't, I had to look it up. Oh, okay. Found a place to watch it. I think it was on Amazon Prime here. And so I really didn't have any preconceived, notions or context or background or anything, which, oftentimes is kind of how I like to go into a film if I'm able to, and just not bring any baggage to bear on it if possible. So, and we'll kind of talk about this, I think, as we walk through the film, so I didn't know what to expect. And so but obviously immediately once you kind of, okay, I'm getting the gist, this is a film that's taking place in Afghanistan, and I think you said like the late 90s or so, or mid 90s, during like the Taliban, beginning of a Taliban rule then. And so obviously as soon as I kind of get the context of where we're at, okay, I see Taliban is coming into this town. Okay, I got to kind of get a sense of what's going on. But it was interesting that, in the beginning of the film, I really did not have an understanding of like how intense and how really, I mean, I guess for lack of a better word, just depressing and almost like hopeless and sad this film ends up being. Um,
Yeah.
because we kind of open on this scene where we've got this street beggar who actually is quite charming and humorous actually in some ways in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, interacting with what's obviously an American. We don't see this American because it's kind of from our POV, but we see the exchange of American dollars to the begging kid. But we see the Taliban come in, starting to corral these women who were in the street and imprison them basically, and we see people running away from them, etc. So it's but I guess the way I just did not I was not expecting just how profoundly depressing and sad this film ends up
Mm-hmm.
being, and really, I mean, in a way, hopeless. I mean, it ends in a way that is just it's very hard to find room for hope within this film, at least. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that's really, I was really impacted by that. I was just not expecting it. But I, like you, I mean, from an aesthetic perspective, the film is really, there's a lot of beauty in this film. The landscapes are really beautiful, and the people, and so much texture in this film. There were a lot of instances where I almost kind of felt like, ooh, this almost looks to me like a Western shot 50 years ago, in
Mm-hmm.
just the
Yeah.
in just the not like a spaghetti Western. There's not, you
Like a
don't
Vista
have,
Vision, like John
yeah,
Ford kind of.
you
Yeah.
don't what oh, you don't have like the Sergei Leone, like
Crash zooms, things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
crash zooms and stuff. Nothing like that going on. And obviously
Yeah.
the subject matter is substantially different, but there was almost that feeling with just, the light, the qualities of the light, that so much of this is shot exterior, or if we're inside, there's a lot of natural light.
Mm-hmm.
These are very simple structures that we're usually in, with a lot of just like open holes in the walls for windows. It really, I don't, and just all the dust and the smoke and the clothes and the faces.
Vistas too of
Yeah,
mountains and yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
And it just, but just from an aesthetic perspective, not any other really, but just an aesthetic kind of made me think of that. But it also made me think documentary. I think you and I briefly, as we were just discussing this before we hopped on and started recording, that there's almost no score in the film.
Mm-hmm.
There is very much like a documentary sense of this film, especially as we kind of get going. But kind of contrasted with, I mean, there's a lot of obviously like very, very specifically composed shots, like very artistically composed shots that you would not tend to find in a documentary. Like the camera
Mm-hmm.
really is very specifically placed, doing very specific things with like attention to mise en scène. So, but yeah, very aesthetically beautiful film. I, like you, and like I said, I didn't know anything about it, so I didn't know that it was shot for peanuts. I didn't know that this was, basically a non-professional cast. I don't know if, most of the crew were professional or not. As I'm not, it's not clear, but talk about an extraordinary film, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of any of that, but
Yeah.
especially considering that. Yeah.
No,
So
exactly. Like that was
yeah.
one of the things that we had chatted briefly about too, was that, like, regardless of the context that this is made, this is a really gorgeous, well shot film. And I think the way that it blends, like you said, those really specific, like there's a lot of shots that are clearly done with cranes or jibs and dollies and things like that that are grounded and are very meticulously crafted and like beautifully framed, but that at the same time there's also these really incredible handheld sequences,
Mm.
where the handheld photography is not like overly shaky. It's still very maintained and intentioned, and yet they
Yeah.
blend those really really well. It was really really well shot, and so I think that, yeah, exactly like you just said, where it's like regardless of its context, it looks great, but when you add that context in, it suddenly, you know, it on top of that is really a feat.
Yeah.
And again, like the budget, I think is listed at like
Well,
$46,000 or something,
and
right? Like it's made for almost nothing.
I
Um,
think even more impressive than that, and I think an important context, and a lot more about the history of Afghanistan and of the Taliban, and you'd shared a little bit of that with me before this. And our intention isn't to get too far into those spaces and kind of keep it focused on the film itself. But I mean, it is important to think about. I mean, the context of this, where basically cinema had been outlawed in this country,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that this was, and I can only imagine, you know, making a film after it had been effectively outlawed, not effectively, I mean definitely outlawed, and what
Yeah.
that must have felt like, the both potentially scary, empowering, and just then logistically not having the infrastructure for cinema because there hadn't been any for so long.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's also, I mean, it's just really to think about those things as well. um,
Yes. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
impressive, yeah.
I mean, I think too, after spending time there with filmmakers, both, like I was working primarily with media there,
Hmm.
and there is this. I think there's this tendency from, whether it's like Western news organizations or kind of media in general, to sort of patronize uh, artists from, you know backgrounds that are would be, considered struggling, or situations that where you have to endure hardship and things like that.
Mm.
And I think that, especially going there taught me a lot about the fact that there is, you know talent is everywhere, regardless of hardship and regardless
Sure.
of like, circumstance. And yet
Hmm.
I think the point that I think is so important to make is that, um the level of talent that so many places have, that is unable to access any means of displaying that talent, is, I think, really what the tragedy the world over is. um,
Mm.
I constantly saw, incredible camera work, incredible storytelling, from people who are completely self-taught, who are totally, making the best of the situation that they have there,
Yeah.
and not complaining about it all, and not asking for pity or anything like that, but rather are just so immersed in the art that they are trying to do, that that's what they do. And that's the talent that they have is so, apparent, regardless of the equipment, regardless of, the budgets that they have. And so I saw so much incredible stuff, and I think that again goes back to, kind of what we're talking about with this film, where it's like, you think about the context that it's a country where cinema was banned, and cinema is, once again, of course, the Taliban is back in power there. So a lot
Mm.
of these rules have come back in place. There
Yeah.
are differences, but again, we don't have to get into the minutia of that. Um, and I worked with so many people whose livelihoods are at, every day at threat of being shut down, both for
Hmm.
reasons of, the gender inequality there. One of the particular things I was working with was, a team of female journalists, and I was there because a lot of these women had no experience using cameras, no experience, conducting interviews, because they had never had those opportunities to do so, and yet are so, just passionate about it,
Yeah.
that it made it incredibly easy to teach these things, because that's what they want to do. And so you're looking at these people putting so much into, these crafts, and the art that they, um, are passionate about, even though at a moment's notice, it could be banned, and they could be, barred from ever doing it again, and things like that. And I think that just is worthy of, mentioning,
Yeah.
just
Well,
the hardship that the actors even in this film would have faced,
yeah.
both before and after. I know that the lead actress, who plays Osama, she was like a beggar, and she was discovered on the street of Kabul, begging by the director, and cast based off of that. And it, I think that the similar to when we discussed Pather Panchali, um, it's not necessarily that, again, that the hardship makes someone's talent more worthy of praise, but rather that you just end up with such a real, raw ability to tell these stories because of how real these experiences are to the people that are making the films like this.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely feel that here, where you just feel this starkness. Like you said, the ending of the film is brutally depressing, but it warrants that. If it was anything other than brutally depressing, it would feel like you were being lied to in a certain way, both in hindsight, but I think at the time as well. I think that Sadiq Barmak was very, very smart in the way that he chose to alter the ending. Of course, I don't know if it's super well known, but the film was originally supposed to end on a happier note, on a lighter note. And we instead end essentially with, a child being sold off to marriage with a much older man. And he shows her these, locks that are essentially like saying, choose one. This is the lock that you're going to be,
Bound
locked
with.
in on with the rest of your life. And it's like an incredibly, incredibly depressing and disturbing ending. And I think the ability to, I think what I'm trying to point at is the ability to be honest like that in a time when I think that there likely was a lot of hope in Afghanistan at this point, because of the fact that there was a transition of government. It seemed like things may get better, things may get more peaceful, and so you could just as easily say, you know what, this is, I'm going to end this on a happy note because people are feeling happy, like there's hope in the country right now, but to instead go this honest route, this really, really grounded, honest route, and say, nothing fundamentally has changed in the way that will change the future for this country. And this is more, in a sense, a warning that these things are going to continue, that the starkness of the ending of this film is saying we're not done, that these problems are going to continue existing unless the root causes of these problems are addressed. And so I think that that's a really incredible way to end the film, and it is just so striking. Like, it really is one of those films that it ended and you just kind of sit for a moment in shock, almost, is what I found.
Yeah. Well, let's back up a little bit too, and
Mhm.
I think this might be a film
Yeah.
that a lot of people listening might not have seen.
Yes, very
And
likely.
so
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
kind of, give a little bit of an overview and kind of walk through it.
Hmm.
But I mean, as we talked about, this film takes place. I forget roughly but it was just like mid '90s or so, right,
I
Cullen?
don't think the film
It
specifies
doesn't
I think it
specify,
just
but we
basically
kind
says
of
mid late 90s. Yeah.
from the kind of the Taliban coming in
Hmm.
and imposing kind of almost a martial law on the town gives us a sense of when that would have been. But I mean, basically, we have a family that we're focused on, which is a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. And there are no
Hmm.
men in this family because they've all been killed in the Afghan Soviet War,
Hmm.
and so there's no men left in the family. And now that the Taliban are here, this presents a substantial problem because none of the women are allowed to basically operate in any capacity outside of the household without a male chaperone.
Hmm.
And so now they were already poor, they were already destitute, having lost the men in their family, and they live in such a poor area, and there aren't many opportunities available to them. And now, I mean, there are none. I mean, they can't even walk the street to go, take care of the most benign, mundane errand they might have to
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
themselves, or to have, and so they're forced with this decision to basically dress the young child up, who ends up being nicknamed Osama by her friend, who ends up being the beggar from the beginning that we had talked about,
Hmm.
who we think is going to kind of give her away, but ends up actually defending her,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
trying to help and save her. But basically, cut her hair, dress her as a boy, so that she's able to go out, possibly get a job, and at least, run errands, pick up food, et cetera, for the family. So this is kind of the story of the film. And, it's like I was telling you, I guess, just because of kind of the tropes that we're exposed to in a lot of Western cinema. I mean, even when the subject matter there's a tremendous amount of gravity that, when real people have gone through these things and it's a dramatization, you still kind of have, some of these tropes that almost seem to always make their way into these films. And
like
so I'm,
permeate, yeah.
And I'm kind of watching, it's like, okay, I'm like, oh, so she's going to have these adventures as a boy. Let's see what's going to, unfold. And I still did not recognize, where this film was going to go. And so, she basically, they beg one of the friends of the father who has passed away. This man who was his friend owns this, like, basically this milk shop, and and basically, please, can you employ he knows that it's a girl passing as a boy, so she starts working there. And you're like, okay, well, maybe, this is going to be the scene where he teaches her how to, like, present as a boy, and maybe there will be some kind of humor here. Nope, nothing like that at all. She's basically there for, a brief day or two, or what seems like only moments before the Taliban comes and takes her away. And we see the Taliban is rounding up all of the young boys, the orphans in the town. Maybe not even orphans, because we see there's kind of some scenes where
for all the boys,
just all the boys, doesn't matter, orphan, not orphan, it's whatever, doesn't matter. We're rounding you all up and we're going to start to train you. And so, okay, all right. So now she is taken, and of course we realize, well, that's going to be much harder for her to pass there, right? And and it's just, it's so matter of factly. It's just one of these scenes after the other, and ultimately she's discovered, and the way she's discovered there is just so harrowing. And this image really is kind of like burned into my mind, is that was it because she was, like, climbing a tree in the courtyard and gets stuck, and so to punish her, they basically hang her from, like, a harness, but she's being hung halfway down a well as punishment. And we don't see this until later, but we see, like, we're kind of looking beneath her. She's obviously terrorized. She's just, like, filled with terror. She's calling out for her mother. I mean, because what else would a child do? She's obviously very young. She's sitting here hanging halfway down this well, and we can hear, like, these drips falling from her down into the well, and I thought they were tears. They pull her up, and we see blood is running down her legs because she has started to menstruate. And that's what we heard falling down into the well. And then, of course, they immediately recognize that she's a girl trying to pass as a boy, and she tries to run to escape, but they catch her. And just, so it's just every step, it's just worse and worse and worse and unrelenting, frankly. And then
I think that's, sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, and I was just going to kind of take it to the kind of, just to continue this kind of overview here. The plot is not it's not really complex or anything, but just to give listeners a sense of the film and what happens in it. And so then basically, although she's, at 10, 11, 12, 12, 13, 14 years old, something like this, she's basically taken to, there's a town hall, kind of like, I don't know what the proper term would be, but basically like a
trial, essentially.
Except there's no real trial. It's just here's this woman was this Western woman who was actually assisting at the hospital where the mother originally worked before the Taliban basically shut down the hospital. In the very beginning of the film, I can't tell. She's speaking English, so I don't know if she's American or Canadian, but she's clearly like a Western woman who had been working in the hospital, and they accuse her of encouraging profanities in the hospital, and so she's committed to being stoned to death. And then there's that journalist that we mentioned, the American journalist.
Shot the footage from the beginning, yeah.
And he's committed to death by fire, of just being shot. We don't it takes place off camera, but we get a sense that he's just gunned down. And it's so matter of fact, and they don't even, it happens so quickly, and the people who are
Hmm.
being tried and ultimately executed don't even know what the hell's going on. They can't
Yeah.
understand anything, and that's kind of illustrated in just such a matter of fact way. It's not really like dramatized, or it doesn't need to be, and we can talk about that a little bit too. Um, and then finally the girl is brought up, and basically the man who's acting as the judge, jury, and executioner says, okay, we forgive you, and we're going to actually, since you have nothing, we're going to marry you off to this old man.
Hmm.
And I mean, God, who looks to be what, 70? I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
come to find out, he's got, I think, like three or so more other wives already.
Yeah.
And here this woman is basically sold into sexual slavery at 14 years old or so, to be basically locked down to the floor of a room with these other women, and to be at the beck and call of this old man. And that's
Hmm.
ultimately how the film ends, is that we see him take her off to the bedroom where they very clearly have sex. And we don't see this, of course, thank God, but we know because the man comes out and begins like the bathing ritual that you would
Yes, that we
do
saw earlier. Yeah.
after sexual intercourse. And that's how the
Yeah.
film ends. So,
Yeah.
whew, uh, I,
Yeah.
I, I hardly know what to do aside from sigh after that, because wow. Um, so there's, just to give some context of kind of what we're
Hmm.
talking
No, I think that's
about, and
that's also very useful. Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
walk through the film a little bit, which we usually don't do. Our intention is never in these podcasts to kind of walk through, the step by step of the plot, because we kind of assume, well, why would you be listening to an episode on a film if you hadn't seen it? But because maybe this film had been seen by less people than many of the other films we picked, I just thought, just give kind of an overview a little bit, just so people have some context, even if they've not seen the film, which, of course, we always recommend go see the film for sure. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
or maybe you've seen it and it's been a while. Although I doubt that wouldn't stick with you. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
you
No,
know,
and I think that the thing that I would say about the structure of the film and the writing is that it's not like I don't think either of us expected there to be like wacky hijinks or something,
no.
a la like Mrs. Doubtfire or anything like that. But you just, I think, associate um, just films, are by and large built up around tropes and cliches and things like that, and that are used across genres. And so there's just, even a subconscious expectation that a film will hit certain notes. And I think
Well, yeah.
what really kind of, struck me about the film is that, yeah, like you have this story about, yeah, okay, you've got a young girl who has to pretend to be a boy. That is really just the inciting incident, in a sense. The film is not necessarily about her working as a boy. It's not about her going to school as a boy. It's a very short period in the film where she's not like either suspected or outright found out to
Yeah.
be a girl.
Right.
And so it's really, I think, about it's just about the desperation, that this like futile effort to just live and just make a living and get money for her family goes so wrong so instantly.
Well, and
Um,
that's where I felt like hopeless was the best. I mean, and again,
yes, yeah.
I'm not suggesting that Afghanistan is hopeless, or that
Hmm.
it's this film that I'm talking about. The story that's contained between the beginning and the end of this film is hopeless. It really, for this character and for these women. I mean, there is no point where there is any reprieve. There is no moment, like you said. It's not like the film is about her passing as a boy, and the hijinks that ensue. How to carry yourself as a boy, and that was a close call, and she learned how to put tie a turban. She didn't. She had to figure out how to to get by on the bathing class, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because well,
Mm-hmm.
obviously that's, you know, gonna reveal things unless she's extremely careful. You know, it's just but it was just at every step. It was just, and I felt like it
It's
was
it's futile.
the
Like I think that
everything is futile and hopeless and
yeah.
hopeless. And it's like, you know, after she's pulled out of the well and the men realize that she's a woman or girl, I guess woman at that point. She's just, there's this, you know, the camera is following her running through this courtyard where she's kind of basically locked in. And there's
Mm-hmm.
just this swarm of young boys who are also in this, you know, training, the Taliban's training, just kind of just following her, running after her, swarming her, and it's just like she's trying to push them away or run through them, and it's just, it's like every moment is hopeless. It's just
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by a world that she can't escape, surrounded by these men who have complete control and power over her life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's at the end when she's sold off, or not sold, but just given away to this man as a wife. He's already got several, and he's talking to them, and they're like middle-aged women, and they're like, oh my god, yeah, this man's horrible. I hate that. I hate him. My life is
Yeah.
miserable. My life, there's no joy in my life. It's just this dark abyss of hell. I feel sorry for you, but that's what it's going to be for you too. You just have more of it in front of you because you're younger. It's just
Yeah.
like, whoa.
And
Wow.
I think that the you know, again, like you said, it's not that Afghanistan is hopeless, but there is certainly a um this the feeling that this film presents and kind of instills is very accurate to a sentiment in the country. When I was there was a bombing while I was there, in Kabul, and I remember showing up at the office that I was working at the next day, and just the very somber tone. Not just because there was a bombing, of course, you know, that incident on its own is bad,
Mm-hmm.
um, but just this sense that it's just going to be this cycle.
Mm.
You know, everyone that I was working with was kind of saying that there's this constant fear that things are never going to get better and that things are just going to devolve into conflict and war again.
Yeah,
And when
because
things like
that's
this
been so
happen, that's
much. Yeah, so
because
much of that.
most of the people I was working with were around my age, which means that their entire lives have been
Yeah.
that. And people who are much older than me, their entire
Yeah, I was
lives have
gonna
been
say it would
that
be.
as
Yeah.
well. And so there's this, and I think the other thing that I think a lot of people, you know, and I don't even fully understand this, is that you don't get used to that even growing up in it. You know, it's not something where it's like there's a bombing goes off or, you know, something similar, and so it's just like, oh, well, I've been growing up in so that's just life. You know, that's what's
Mm-hmm.
always happened. It is as shocking as a or a bomb going off near you in the city that you live in right now or wherever you live. It is
Yeah.
just as shocking and just as harrowing for the people that live there. You know, it's
Yeah.
just as bad of an event, and if not worse mentally, because they know what that then can lead to. And so I
Mm.
think that the dour ending of this film is really, really, reflective of how so many people, like what decades and decades of conflict and decades of abuse of, treating, you know, half of a population as second class citizens or worse than
Or
second
I
class
was gonna
citizens,
say, I'd
not even citizens.
as
um,
animals, not worse than
yeah.
animals even.
That I mean, there is the very, you know, poignant moment in the opening of the film when the women are literally locked up in a cage with like
Yeah.
chickens.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is really, as stark and as dour as the ending of the film is, it is accurate, you know. And it's the shameful part is that it's been over 20 years since this film was made, and it's just as accurate
Mm.
as it was then.
Mm.
That is really, I think, the depressing aspect is how much,
Yeah.
um, you know. Again, I
But
was relatively safe there. I have not experienced
And you could leave.
Anything, and I was able to leave. Exactly, I could safely leave and come back to Canada and be safe here.
Yeah.
And just, dipping my pinky toe in that world for a very brief time had such a profound impact on me. I can't, you can't fathom what it would be like. And I think the greatest respect I can pay to this movie is saying that, yeah, it makes you feel like shit. And you kind of, that's the best possible thing it could do, is to show, as I said at the beginning, is if this film ended on a happier note, on a lighter note, if it did the Schindler's List thing where it ends with sentimentality and tries to kind of, have this moment of emotional, pause and saying, oh my goodness, I could have done, like, if it tried to be sentimental in that aspect, it would be betraying
or manipulative
what it is, or manipulative, what it is actually, truthfully there. And, I think it even goes to the conversations we've had about Herzog so many times about this truthfulness. It's not about, I think that this film is quite accurate in its portrayal of this time, but even regardless of that, it's very truthful to the emotional truth of the period. And I think, and the nuance too is also very important too. And this film is very nuanced in a lot of ways. Like you said, even to the fact that the young beggar boy, at first is saying that he's going to give her up until, for money and things like that. And then without any, there's no reckoning.
Nothing
for him.
happens.
Like, there's not a point where he's like, yo, you know what? I feel bad. It's just that it's also kind of a perfect show that, like, there is, humanity is always going to be there, and it doesn't feel the need to, like, point a magnifying glass at it and be like, look at how changed he is. Look at this arc that he has. It doesn't happen like that. It just, yes, naturally people will stick up for other people. I think that that's maybe the one hopeful element in the film is that it does show there are people willing to help and willing to risk themselves to help.
Yeah,
and,
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. You're right. I had kind of, and of course now that you say that, I immediately recognize it. And you're right. I think that because he's, we can imagine that after of course the titles rolled on this film, if we extended the story, he's going to be trained and indoctrinated into the Taliban way of living and ideology, etc. But there is some core there that, that this child had it within them to, like, he could have easily, like, given her up and won favor with, with the adults there running the show, but or favor with all the other boys, and maybe made him more popular, or, whatever. But he could have used that to curry favor, done something, but instead, you're right, he kind of put himself, kind of stuck his neck out to protect this girl for no apparent real reason. And so that's a good point that, there was, it wasn't, it wasn't dramatized. The shift wasn't that we didn't have a scene where they, like, connect over some story, and, somewhere. It was just whatever happened off screen. And if anything, and you're right, I think this is very much like life, but thank you for reminding me there is some hope, because that did show, like, hey, the humans are humans, and some of that means that, yes, these bad things happen, but also there's also good within that too. And there are other characters that, the man who knows that it's a girl trying to pass as a boy, and that, still puts himself at risk and has, hires her to help the family and
then tries to protect her too.
And tries to protect her, but we also see the limits of that. I mean, it's not, he doesn't, like, throw himself in between, the Taliban and, no, I won't let you, over my dead body. I mean, this is the realities of it. It's like, okay, I did as much as I could, but now it's out of my hands, and I'm sure that man, he knew, okay, well, geez, she's going to be found out. I mean, she can't hide her gender forever, be living in this Taliban camp. I mean, that's just not going to be possible, but, so
and
the
even
limitations
during
too.
that trial at the end of the film, there's the Taliban guard that's kind of escorting her there says to the judge, essentially, she's desperate. She was working for a fan. Like,
Yeah.
there is a level of like understanding there, which is again where I talk about that nuance. The film is not pro. Obviously, it's not pro Taliban, but it still
Yeah.
kind of involves this level of like the complexities of the fact that it's human beings carrying out these things.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
and again, just to relate to it further, again, like I met people who, I photographed and filmed Taliban, I filmed Mujahideen, I filmed people who fought with the, NATO and American forces. So I met a very large spectrum of people.
Yeah.
And there was constantly a through line of desire, like personal desire, in this very real way that people, regardless
Talk about
of their
that, Mark.
ideology,
Like personal desire. Yeah. Tell me.
there was always this conversation about peace,
Mm-hmm.
and a desire for peace. And I remember at one point I was interviewing someone, not interviewing, but talking with and filming with someone who was in the Taliban, and they said that the choice of so many people is that the Americans are going to come through your village, and they'll kill anybody who is like a military aged male, and so you can either join the Taliban and fight that, or you can basically guarantee death and not. And so there's this choice with war that forces you down these and I'm not in any way, of course, justifying the atrocities that the Taliban has committed, or anyone has committed.
That would even be true, that
yes,
that
or that
necessary.
that these things are necessarily factual, but I do think that there is one of these kind of, you get these angles of nuance through people. And I think one of the things that I remember hearing is when I was at a party at a UN compound in Kabul, or a dinner, not really a party, and the workers of the UN there are not allowed to leave their compound, so they don't really get to interact with many locals. They kind of are in the UN area the entire time, and it's very, very restricted as to who can go in and who can leave. And someone said, like, I just don't get how the fathers and the brothers of these women could, just stand by while this is all happening to their like sisters and mothers and things like that. And it's like, they must kind of support it because of that. And I sort of remember thinking, like, I'm working with these local journalists there in Kabul, like these Afghan journalists, and there is not only an immense amount of bravery on the part of the women that are choosing to show up to work every single day, but a lot of these men would also be thrown in prison or worse if they were found out doing these things. And so I think that in these difficult situations, it can be very easy to kind of paint a broad brush and sort of say, like, there's a very simple black and white factionality to this. And yet again, one of the things that I appreciate about this movie is that it showed humanity, but like you said, kind of the limits to that too, about like, okay, there are people helping, but how far will they go to help? Will they stick their own neck out? Will they risk their own lives?
Well, and to what end?
I
think that's one of the things that this film. I think that's a big part of the hopelessness that you get that you get a sense of very strongly from this film, is that it's the powers that be are clearly just like none of the characters in this film have any agency, hardly at all. They are abject poverty, basically. The tools that they have available to themselves to empower themselves are just, like non-existent. It's, I think the film does a great job of, allowing you to like see that and empathize with that. It's easy to say, well, like I have means. I'm like in the United States. I have money. I call a lawyer. I live in a country where these things wouldn't even, it's like I'm used to being profoundly empowered compared to any character in this film, I think most of our listeners would also be equal, used to being equally empowered, or, very similarly empowered, where, well, of course we wouldn't stand up for it, because our lives would not even be at risk to stand up for, you know what I mean? It's just as, so I think it's just that the system is overwhelming, and and it's so far reaching that, and I think this is, that speaks to one of the, when ideologies, like the ideology of the Taliban, for example, I mean, when it is pervasive in an area, it is profoundly difficult to fight against that. When it permeates every aspect of a person's life and culture and what they know, or, I mean, you don't even know what you don't know to fight something necessarily. So anyway, for many reasons, you never get a sense that these characters were like, oh, they could have done something, but they didn't,
Well, exactly. And it's
You
like, to go
fully
back on that idea of
understand.
futility of
Yeah.
like the man that employs her for basically one day. It's like, even if he had stuck up for her more,
Yeah, no,
or
it wouldn't have
tried
changed
to,
anything.
it's like, what would have, like,
Nothing.
either would he have been arrested or executed, and then she would have been found out anyway, right?
Even sooner. Even sooner. Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of this futility, and I think that that's another aspect of it that is, is just so raw and real. Is not only the hopelessness in a like a long-term sense, but just the day-to-day, just grinding of like the human spirit of like, oh well, it would be pointless for me to do, like, and just this like guttural ripping out of the human spirit, really, of this like mass oppression. And so you just, yeah, it really is, it's a tragic thing to look at and to see, and it's starkly, again, as I said, starkly feels very, very grounded, feels raw, feels real.
Yeah.
And it's frightening because it's not sensationalized.
No.
And
I mean, if anything, that this
you-
is a gentle representation.
yeah,
frankly,
and you also, I mean, it makes it, it's not hard to imagine that things like this and much worse
Oh yeah.
are still taking place to this day.
Oh
And
yeah.
not only in
And all around the
Afghanistan,
world. Yeah. Of course.
And so I think that that's one of the things, like, you finish this film, and again, you kind of sit there for like a little bit, just kind of going like, damn, and then this is a film, these are actors, these are scenes that are constructed, and this isn't even half of what what the reality is, and yet it still is so emotionally impactful. And I think that even, we haven't really touched too much on the actual performances of the actors yet. I know we kind of discussed the fact that they're primarily amateur actors, that a lot of the dialogue is improvised, but I just want to say that these performances are also incredibly powerful. That these actors, for having basically never acted before,
and probably had very limited exposure to cinema, even as like an audience. Like, it's not like we're so media savvy, like in our lives, like me and you, and the listeners here listening to this podcast, almost certainly, it's like we're so media savvy, right? Like, somebody pulls out a camera, like, what's going on, like, the drill, even if you've never acted before or been, everybody, we live in such a like selfie rich, like, let's take a video of this and a video of that, and I'm on TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff. Like, I mean, we're just such a media savvy culture, right? Generally speaking, and that would not have existed. And I almost wonder if that's like, maybe that was to the betterment of, because instead of performing per se, it's just like, well, okay, like, I don't,
this is what really what I feel. Yeah. And there's a lack of self-awareness. There's a lack of like, there's actually a funny kind of like theory that people are much shyer on camera these days because they're aware that they're constantly being filmed, and that
that's what I've tried. It's a performative.
On camera.
Everything is performative today. Yes, we're always performing.
Whereas like even here, even in like countries where we are so inundated with media constantly, that you look at old home movies where cameras were just not very prevalent,
Yeah.
as a commonplace thing in your day-to-day life, that
Well,
people are
were
so
more
much more
natural.
outgoing on camera and natural, whereas now people are so hyper aware of what they look like on camera.
Yeah.
Even if it's not themselves, they're just hyper aware of what people look like on camera in these casual environments. And so I think that,
Yeah, that's a good point.
the fact that a lot of these actors likely had very limited exposure to cinema and to sort of an understanding of what the final product was. Of
At least
no, I don't
compared
mean
to
that in
us,
a
for sure.
yeah,
Compared to us,
and
for
I don't
sure.
mean that
Yeah.
in a like obviously they are aware of what a film is, but
Sure.
just not being aware of or not having ever sat in an audience at a premiere, or not ever having like something
Saturated.
of theirs be in front of an audience of 1 million people or even
Right.
1,000 people, and having that level of self-awareness on the screen,
Yeah.
that you do get these
Self-consciousness. Self-consciousness.
yes, exactly, yeah. You
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
these really, really natural performances that are, again, like you said, like it's almost as if they're just reacting the way that they would react in life to
It
these
certainly feels that,
events.
and which is not to take away anything from the director. I mean, he's got to be
Mhm.
credited with, as the director of the film, directing these performances, and so I don't ever mean to try to excuse or explain away the performances, without
Yeah.
giving any credit to the director. I think that would be ridiculous. It's very clear he shepherded these, performances into this film. But yeah, I mean, but you're right. Everything works in the film. It really does. And I see great reason for this to be a motivational or inspirational thing to you, because it's, I mean, especially with your unique experience, at least again relative to most of us, getting to go to Afghanistan and experience a lot of people's stories. I hope you are able to channel that into something. But this is, I mean, again, this shows you, it's like, and I think sometimes it's so funny, right? We get, all of us do it, or many of us do it. We get kind of caught up in talking about lenses and cameras and technology and this and that, and all this stuff. And the reality is, just get your butt out there and get something on camera and tell a story that's worth telling. And I mean, to you, and that's the only person it has to be important to, is to you.
Mhm.
Whatever your story is. But I think that this is, I mean, there's so many reasons why I love cinema, and several of them are embodied here in this piece. I've always trying to kind of preach the powers of cinema and its ability to exercise one's empathetic muscles. And I feel
Mhm.
like good literature, good cinema can definitely exercise the empathetic muscles, which is something that's good for all of us. And cinema can transport us to a new time, to a new place. It can put us in the middle of people that we've never met, and who knows, maybe we won't get the chance to meet in our real life. But when it's done well, it can do all those things for us. And I think that this film is just a great example of that. So yeah. I'm just I'm getting motivated too.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Totally.
there's
Yeah.
just me on my soapbox for cinema there for a second, and for good literature. I want to take. Can I take a digression here for just one quick second?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I
Shout
was
outs to
thinking,
literature.
just real quick, yeah, because this had me thinking, and just this, I feel like we need to have a little segment. It could be like Clark's soapbox or something. but no,
60-second
but no,
soapbox.
there's something I'm curious, like just real quick. We'll wrap it up with this, and it is like a digression away from the film itself, but I feel like it's interesting to think of in the context of having just talked about this film. Um, you know, I wonder, and as somebody your generation or so younger than me, you know, I fear that, and it seems to be the case, that people are reading less and less literature, like long form fiction. And to my mind, literature is so powerful in what I was just talking about, the exercising of that part of your brain that where empathy emanates from. Because I don't think empathy is not just a static kind of innate thing. empathy, like almost any other skill or power that one can have, can be exercised. It can be increased. I think films like this film do it. And I think good literature does it. I think long form literature does it because it engages the mind. What you're having to do is imagine characters, people that you don't know, haven't met. They aren't even real, of course. But you're building a character, you're building a personality in your mind, you're building motives for those characters in your mind, and you're holding them there. You're literally using your mind to imagine these characters. And you're doing so over the course of hours and hours and hours. And I feel like this directly relates to one's ability to see someone in their day-to-day life who they don't know well, perhaps. Maybe it's a cashier at the grocery store, the guy at, the mechanic working on your car, whoever the hell it is. A person living in Afghanistan right now that you've not ever met. It enables you. I think it when you doing, it's funny because it's like literally practicing that with imaginary people in literature and film allows a person to be better at that in real life. It literally strengthens your ability to imagine all the stories that, because everybody has so many stories, and you don't even have to know at the outset all of their real stories. But if you can just begin to imagine what their stories might be, you start to see them as full, complicated humans in the same way that you see people really, really well as full, complicated humans, including yourself, of course, the person you know the most well, that you see as the most human. And I worry that as we read less long form fiction, as we spend more time doing that, as we spend less time doing that, I feel like we lose some of that. I don't know, but there's my soapbox, but I feel like cinema and literature, that's really two of their greatest strengths, is that right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is a great point, and I think that one of the reasons I worry that empathy is becoming rarer and rarer is because you look at the amount of people who read regularly.
That's what I'm saying.
That's
I
even
worry.
dropping. That's so that's.
But it's not just reading.
Yeah, very good point.
It's because I think it's like, look, people read all the time. You're reading your Twitter feed. You're reading your Instagram
reading,
feed.
You're reading literature and reading.
People. You're reading the Wikipedia entry. You're reading, whatever your favorite news source is. You're reading an article there. We read all the time. You're reading text. You're reading emails. Like, we're reading probably more than ever. But we're spending less time reading long form quality fiction. And that, I worry, will potentially have big time negative impact on our empathetic abilities. But on that note, that's where I feel like cinema also, I feel like, has those powers. And I feel like not only can it just entertain for the sake of entertaining, but it also, even while it does so, I think it can make us better human beings.
Well, and here's an example. This is a perfect example of a film that I would almost hesitate to describe as entertaining, not in a negative sense, but say that it is much more.
I think you can say it's captivating.
It's captivating.
Yeah. It's captivating.
It's difficult to remove. It's difficult to stop watching it once you start watching it. So. I know we don't typically say like a thumbs up or thumbs down for recommendation, but I think that I would say that, if you haven't seen this film, after listening to this, it's available online. At least I think both of us saw it on Prime. And, if you can get access to it, I would highly recommend it. It is disturbing, but it's a worthwhile watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, Cullen, thank you so much for bringing the film to my attention. I enjoyed watching it. I mean, again, enjoyed in a relative sense, and I appreciated the film, and I appreciated our conversation about it. And I hope you listening out there did so as well. If you've made it to this point, I imagine you must have. And all right, well, it'll be my turn next time to pick a film.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. I don't have anything in mind yet. We'll see what I come up with. But until then, everybody, be well, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah, bye-bye.